to Talking Supply Chain. In each episode, top supply chain industry professionals and the nation's top thought leaders join host Brian Strait and share their unique insights to help supply chain managers stay one step ahead of their competition. This is Talking Supply Chain. It seems like the holy grail of the supply chain is visibility. Everyone is in search of it, but few have found the true end to end visibility that we require. Is it even possible? Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Talking Supply Chain podcast. I'm your host, Brian Strait, and thank you for taking a few minutes to join us for this episode. Today, we're going to try and answer that question on whether true visibility is possible. And we're also going to look into the future of visibility, including something that's called visibility as a service. And to do that with me today, I'm being joined by Frank Kenney, Director of Industry Solutions at Cleo. Hi, Frank. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Brian, thank you for having me on. Thank you.
Great. Great. I'm glad you're here. Get excited to talk about this. But before we dive into the topic, if you don't mind, maybe you can give our audience a little background on yourself and a little bit about Cleo, because some people may not be familiar with you guys.
Thank you, Brian. So my name is Frank Kenney, and I look after our industry solutions as well as our market strategy here at Cleo. I've been doing this for about 24, 25 years. I was one of the lead analysts at Gardner, looking after integrations for a while, worked with some companies in the industry, and I've been here at Cleo for just about 8 years. Cleo is an ecosystem integration company, and that's a very nice way of saying we help facilitate how companies buy things, how companies sell things, how companies fulfill the things that they sell, how they ship them, and then finally how they bill them. And so we look at these things as supply chain activities. And so we help companies interact and connect and for the purposes of collaboration and procurement. We help companies interact and collaborate and connect for purposes of capturing orders and those types of things. And then we help people talk to their logistics departments or their logistics partners and getting loads and getting freight moved around. And then finally, we help companies connect to their partners, collaborate their partners for invoicing. And sometimes that's using auditing services, and sometimes that's using payment services and gateways. So we like to look at ourselves as a full service provider, an ecosystem provider of integrations in all of the disciplines of supply chain.
So this is great then, because you're touching all sorts of segments of the supply chain. So as we talk about end-to-end visibility, I mean, you guys are kind of in all of it
Yeah,
in some way.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. That's what we try. That's what we strive to do. And we really strive to focus on supply chain. There's a ton of different verticals and expertise, but we really like to spend our time there. And we got resources that we build, that we hire for, to really kind of focus on really nailing the supply chain the right way.
Yeah. So, I mean, you guys are in a lot of areas. Today, we're going to focus on the area of visibility,
Mhm.
which is part of what you guys do. Want to get started because we talk about visibility, and companies are always talking about, I want visibility in this, I want visibility here, there. Can you kind of set the stage, though, and talk about end-to-end visibility, what it really is, and why it is so important to have total visibility of your supply chain today in 2025?
Yeah, Brian, absolutely. So I like to think of it as end-to-end visibility dot dot dot, right? Because the stuff that comes out of after the dot are the actions. So I need to be able to see things so that I can do something. And so we need end-to-end visibility so that we can be as agile as we can when things happen. Well, what types of things? Geopolitical things or natural disasters, shifts and trends in markets, and anything in between. This idea of end-to-end visibility, think of it from the perspective of a consumer. Consumers are much more aware of the things that they're consuming and how the things that they're consuming came to market. And that could be everything from the diamond industry and an engagement ring and making sure that it was a conflict-free diamond, or it could be food and making sure that the food was raised and with range-free chickens and those types of things. So it's always been important from a messaging and a consumerization piece about being able to look at all of the different points of a supply chain to understand how the things that you're consuming, whether they're services you're consuming or products you're consuming, how they were sourced, how they were built, and who built them and where they were built to be able to make better decisions on when you spend your dollar. What companies have recognized, especially in the post-COVID world, was that their supply chains were incredibly fragile and incredibly dependent on what's interesting, dock workers that may be in another country that have mandates to spend to actually stand 7 feet away instead of 2 or 3 feet away, which means that ships don't get loaded as fast, which means that ships don't leave berth when they need to, which means that it takes longer to get to where they're going, it takes longer to unload, and so forth and so on and so on. As we moved into the Amazon type of world with the Amazon effect, this idea that when I buy something, I really want to know where it's at. Sometimes with Amazon, I don't want to know that it's 4 doors down, just get it to me. But I do want to have an idea of, is it going to be this morning? Is it going to be this afternoon? And uh, so much of that intent and so much of that information is so reliant on being able to say, where did it come from? Where did it come from? Where is it coming from? Where is it coming from? Where did it come from? Where did it come from? And so we start to look at that as end-to-end visibility. What's interesting is unless you have full insight into the raw materials that make your phone, the lithium, the metal, or into your food sources and how the raw materials are gathered from there. You have some visibility, but you don't have true end-to-end visibility. And so we've seen companies really focus on having end-to-end visibility throughout their supply chain to start to determine where the fragility may exist and to start to assume that there is going to be disruption and how can they start to build plan B, plan C, and plan D to deal with that disruption should it happen. So we're starting to see a lot of resilient supply chains. And so given, just uh, uh, all of the activities that are happening in the world, and again, the political spectrum down to the environmental weirdness and the climate and everything else like that, and what does that all mean? There's a need and there's a want for resiliency. There's a want for consistency. There's a want for dependability, so that I know I can run my business. And so that's why we are now focused on something we've been talking about for decades in IT, this idea of end-to-end visibility.
Yeah. And sometimes I gotta be honest, sometimes as a consumer, I don't need the end-to-end visibility. There was the day that I was so frustrated because a package that 2 days earlier had been a mile from my house at a facility was in 3 different states. And sometimes visibility is not great from consumer, but from companies, obviously, visibility is really important. So with that in mind, what do you see working really well from a visibility standpoint today for companies? And where are there areas that visibility is not working particularly well?
Where we have linked visibility with the customer experience, it's worked incredibly well.
Mhm.
And the example that you just gave, something that was a mile down from your house when in fact it was a few states away, that gave you a customer experience that wasn't so satisfactory.
Right.
Companies take that very, very, very serious. And again, you finish the sentence. Why do we need? I need visibility so that I can better plan my day, so that I can take half of the day off because they're delivering my couch in the morning, or the repair person is coming over in the afternoon, so that I can better plan. We're doing a great job where visibility really impacts the entire customer experience. And, as you're well aware of, in any in any kind of economic model or um, any type of environment that is dependent or that has an economy, the satisfaction of the consumer is the best indicator of whether that person is going to buy again. So that stuff is really important.
Yeah.
Where we are struggling when it comes to visibility is the further and further we get away from the customer.
Mhm.
So when we start to look at some of the lithium mines, for instance, that are in East Africa, when we look at some of the lithium mines, we may not be thinking about it when we buy an iPhone, but there is an impact, and there is a fragility that's there, and it does impact the overall cost of this device that we hold in our hands. We don't do such a good job at having that visibility, or I think communicating that visibility and passing down that information. I don't think we do a good job when we are degrees are separated from the consumer themselves. The closer we
Yeah.
get to consumer, the better we do visibility, quite frankly, because the more we care about it, because we're now thinking about the customer much more than we are when things are in their raw state.
Yeah, is that, I mean, that sounds almost like what you're saying is that because the impact, using my example, for instance, I was not annoyed. I was annoyed to some extent over the fact that this package was here, then it wasn't. And hopefully the company learned from that. Maybe, hey, looked at, hey, maybe there's a better way to do this. But if I was annoyed by that, I may not have bought from that company again, right? So is that because that visibility at those last few steps has such a great impact on the ability to retain the customer?
I
that
think
that
it,
we're so focused on that and not so much at the beginning process where the customer, the fact that something is delayed from the raw material standpoint, the customer doesn't know that, doesn't care.
yeah, and so one, the idea that the customer doesn't know it and they don't care, so we're not focused on the visibility for that. I think it's more so that the customer has the assumption that someone at the company is looking out in their best interest.
Yeah,
So I may not have visibility, but they better have
yeah,
visibility, right? They better have planning. And then I think the second thing is, when you have a package, when you're looking down at your phone and you have a package that's a mile away, well, and it's really 3 states away. Well, that's the difference, Brian, between you saying, you know what, let me hold off on going to the store. And I guess I'll go to the store in an hour. It'll be rush hour and it'll take me 45 minutes longer as opposed if I leave now, but the package is only a mile away.
right.
Right. And so it does have an impact. And that's why I think when you say visibility so that I can better plan my day and those types of things. The closer you get to the customer, the more you're impacting um, what people really feel as tangible, their
Mhm.
time, your
Yeah,
customer's time. That's that impact, and companies tend to watch that. The other side of visibility, really, the further that you get away from that company, the more visibility starts to get buried within technology stacks. They start to get buried among things like enterprise resource planning, ERPs, or WMSs, warehouse management systems, or transportation management systems. They tend to get buried in status updates from real-time transportation visibility platforms and EDI X12 or Edifact 214 documents and all of this stuff. It tends to get the visibility is important, but it tends to get commoditized down to or homogenized down to a technology stack. And so it's not front of mind to, let's say, the person that's responsible for your CSAT surveys or your customer satisfaction metrics or your gross revenue retention numbers. And I think that that's the disconnect that we have.
yeah. And that you mentioned, as you talked about that, it ties into, I think, my next question really nicely, and that is I want to talk about some of the drawbacks to what we see in the market today.
Mhm.
And I think typically an organization like we do with any tech solution, anytime we have a problem, we go buy a solution, a technology product, we install it, and then we let it run, right?
Right.
And I think that's the way visibility solutions have traditionally been as well. It's like you go by, and there are hundreds of visibility companies out there. I mean, there are plenty of options. You go buy one, you put it in, and you let it go. So when you do that, though, there has got to be some drawbacks to that, some disadvantages to that kind of approach. So what do you see there from that kind of approach of just install and let it go, basically?
If you're going to monetize visibility, then what you need to do is you need to make assumptions on what people want to see.
Mhm.
And so you see the monetization and visibility technologies pop up in different parts of the supply chain. But you generally, the thing that they have in common is that they all have an intended audience. And they all make an assumption, and that assumption may be based on studies and talking to groups and surveys, but there's always an assumption that's made they are going to want to see this. This is what's going to be important. Well, I think what's interesting is that in, again, most economies and most markets, you choose the companies you do business based on differentiation. Um, you choose what big box retailer you're going to walk into based on, one of the big box retailers has more lights. One of the big box retailers, if you stop, one of the stock people or a person, wearing a nameplate, if you stop them, they're going to walk you and you ask them, where's the applesauce? They're going to walk you over to that applesauce. Other big box retailers will just say, I think it's over an aisle 15 on the right hand side.
Yeah.
That's differentiated. So you could have two companies that are competing in the same market, but that value two different things. Visibility is no different. And so you have companies that offer visibility, but part of the value proposition is they're saying you're going to need to see these 10 things. And sometimes you say, well, these 10 things are cool, but I actually need to see these 10 other things because that's how I'm differentiating my company. Or, yeah, I need to see eight of these things, but I need to see three of these other things. And
Yeah.
and that's the challenge that you have when you start to monetize visibility. And so you almost want to say, I'll tell you what, I'm going to, because I'm actually touching everything, I'm gonna just create data for everything that I touch, anytime I touch it, anytime there's an event, anytime things move, and I'm going to give you that. And what you can do is you can pull out what is important to you. And that is the direction, certainly, that we're thinking about here at Cleo, but that's also the direction that I think the market overall will start to go into when we talk about visibility. You can have the whole kit and caboodle, and you can choose the things that are important to you.
Yeah. That's so funny because you were saying that I'm thinking as a customer. I had a couple of experiences at Christmas time this year where the visibility that the store provided me made the process either much better or much worse. My
Right.
shopping experience, right? And obviously we buy a lot of stuff online, but I went into let's call it a big box uh, home improvement retailer that
Mhm.
is orange in nature, right?
Okay.
And they have an app, obviously, like most stores do, but their app has a store mode, which I was able to just type in the item I wanted. It told me exactly what aisle and bin it was in, right? Now take that to another perspective. I went into a book retailer at Christmas time looking for a specific book. They told me I had been at a previous location of theirs. They told me, no, this location has that item. I went down to that location. The guy says, yes, we have three of them in stock. Okay, great. I can't find it. Can you show me? Well, it turns out that in their system, that book, depending on how it was classified, whether it was humor, whether it was teen, whether it was, action, whatever, it could be in any of four different places.
Hmm.
And he walked me around the store for 10 minutes. We couldn't find the book.
Wow.
Right. And the end result was I ended up leaving that store and buying the book on Amazon instead because he
That
couldn't tell me where the book was, even though their retail system told me the item was in stock and in the store. Right. And I I remember walking out and telling him, it's like, you guys really need to fix this. because I'm leaving the store without buying anything now because of
You
it.
know, and so therein lies the danger, right? The danger of the curse of information.
Yeah,
Well, let's say you're back in the orange big box home improvement, and you because I do this as well, right? I go to the Blue Apron probably a little more because it's closer, but
yeah,
you walk in and you go, okay, hey, I got the app. Let me go to store mode. It is in aisle 21, bay 13. That's great. Here's the problem. When I got there, I picked it up and I walked to the self-service checkout line,
yeah,
checked out, got in the car, came home, and I said, crap, I forgot X, Y, and Z. I was just there and I forgot X, Y, and Z. Part of the experience of going to a retail outlet is the opportunity to spend a few minutes walking down an aisle,
yeah,
maybe seeing something else that you need. Retail CPG, the big guys actually depend on you to not just buy the item that you want, but buy about 4 or 5 other items, right? That's the
yeah,
lure of getting you into the store. So I don't want to disappoint your expectations by telling you exactly where something is, and then you can just walk in and walk out because that doesn't really work for me. But at the same time, you are more likely to even come to my store in the first place if you can know that we have them. And
yeah,
so that's where you start to say, yeah, visibility is incredibly important. I want to tell you that the store has the book, but I may not necessarily want to tell you where that book is because I want you to have the experience at the bookstore.
yeah. And that goes back to the old days of retail, right? Where the stores used to put the sale items in the back of the store,
Exactly.
right? To force you to walk through the non-sale items to get
It's
there.
uh, it's it's interesting because one of the retailers that we've been talking about, they put the milk in the back of the store, and it is within an eye line of the front door. So you
Yep,
walk through the front door, you look up, all the way in the back of the store is the milk.
yep,
That's great. I know where it is. Guess what I have to do? I've got to pass through 20 other aisles, the men's section, the women's section, the electronics section. Ooh, look at that TV on the wall. Oh my goodness, there's that latest Xbox game,
yep,
right? Oh, I needed these notebooks. Oh, I needed this Yeti container before you go get to the milk. So there's some stores that have been just really have made it a science and have done really well with it. But the visibility thing is going to be really, really tough. Again, Amazon has done an incredible job at setting a narrative that says, um, before you do business with anyone, you should know if they have it in stock and if they can get it. Um, Now, visibility doesn't mean real time. Visibility just means that they have it. So you bought a book on Amazon, but and you got to pay for it, and you got visibility, and Amazon is giving you that visibility in lieu of instant gratification.
right.
And that's the key. If you would have bought that book at the store, you would have had it immediately.
Yeah,
Now you're waiting for 2 or 3 days based on what your membership privileges are with Amazon, but the visibility has cured that instant gratification. And
yep.
that's another way of using visibility in an incredibly powerful way.
So as we talk about visibility, and obviously visibility is shaping customer expectations and experience as well, as we just talked about. There is something else that's popping up now in the visibility space, and that is visibility as a service.
Mhm.
So as many people know, as a service type products, are kind of a way to buy the latest technology or scalability of technology without paying the upfront costs. It's very common in robotics and warehouse automation systems, robotics as a service, where the companies, they in essence, if I understand this correctly, right, they lease the systems like on a monthly or yearly basis, and then they can scale it accordingly. So they're only getting what they actually need. And it protects companies in many ways. It protects them from having outdated systems that they can't get rid of because they've invested too much money in, right? Um, so is visibility as a service, is it the same kind of model? Is it kind of leasing or renting visibility systems?
So I think it could be a couple of things. Let's talk about the idea of a service real fast.
Yeah.
So the idea of a service is something that does something that performs um, something for you, or that gives you a product, or that performs a service for you, that does something for you
Hmm.
without you having to know how it was done. So
Okay.
the idea of the robotics and automation where you rent out a warehouse, well, it could be a huge labor force. It could be trained monkeys. It could be robotic automation. All you know is that you have an expectation of this is the amount of things that are going to be delivered to me, or this is the level of service I'm going to have. This is what I'm going to pay. And if that doesn't happen for me, I have a way of escalating it. I don't
Yeah.
need to know how it's delivered.
Hmm.
The visibility at the idea of visibility as a service is this idea that, again, when you visit in order to see something, you have to be able to at least interact with it in a way that I'm close enough that I can actually see it, I can monitor it, interact with it, I can put hands on it so that I can manipulate it, or interact with it, I am part of it, so I know the inner workings. And so this idea that you have so many different ways of achieving visibility. And the different ways of achieving visibility are going to be very dependent on what you're watching. And what you find out is, again, we talk about this end to end idea. So we start to recognize that visibility exists at a business level and starts to come down through all of the different levels of a business into the technology, into the transactions, into the computer calls or the API calls, and those types of things. So, what type of visibility and how do I gather all of that? And boy, wouldn't it be great if there was technology that can just gather all of it and then make it make sense, or make it or surface the things that are important to me and curdle out the noise. And so visibility as a service offers that type of approach where I know there are things that, as I was talking about earlier, there are attributes of things that I want to see, but I don't need to see anything else.
Hmm.
But all of the things that I want to see are maybe um, a consolidation of 100 other things, or maybe it's correlation that goes on, and maybe it's an issue of granularity, how big and how small things are. The end result is I just need to see these data points. And so this idea of visibility as a service is the idea of looking at the visibility data from a whole plethora of different endpoints in your ecosystem and being able to surface up the data you want to consume as the consumer of that service.
So then, in that scenario, then that says to me that it's very scalable, then, right? Because as you decide you want more visibility in another area, or add in new suppliers, et cetera, that it's something you easily could scale up, right? As opposed to have to update software, or whatever you may do previously with an installed system.
Yeah, I think the better word is, Brian, it's elastic.
Elastic, okay.
Right. So if I'm a certain type of retailer, in during the holiday season, I may need to scale up. During the beginning of the summer months and the spring months, I may need to slim down. And so I pay for that elasticity, because if I was going to buy the technology and implement the technology, that technology I'm paying for whether I use a lot of it or I use a little of it. And so scale kind of denotes just growing out. One of the tenets of cloud computing in true cloud computing and true as a service is this idea of elasticity. So think of it more not of just scaling, but of slimming down as well. And so it's elastic infrastructure. But you're absolutely right. Now, from a business perspective, when you think about anything that's delivered as a service and visibility, no difference, you kind of don't think about scale. You just think about, hey, I've got a quota that I've got to onboard 10 new customers. I just need to know that I can do it. It's not a
Mhm.
measure of scale. I just need to know that I can do it. And so I am connecting an entirely new data center, and I'm using a visibility as a service platform. I just need to know that when I go press play, I instantly have all of the data feeds, and now that's feeding into the data that I want to look at.
So does that then have, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying that there is a financial component to this, at least at the start, right? I mean, I know one of the cool things about robotics as a service is that if you don't know how many robots you may need a year from now, you don't have to buy 1,000 robots.
Exactly.
Right? You can buy 500, you can buy 300, and then 3 months later decide, hey, I need another 200. I just go get another 200 robots, right? So it shifts that financial burden off of you as the customer, as the company, from having to make that decision and then maybe make the wrong decision and shell out all that money up front, and allows you to, hey, okay, I need to make an adjustment. I can make that adjustment. So is this visibility as a service is the same kind of idea that I don't necessarily have to get it right when I first install it, and so I'm not tying up as much capital initially.
Yeah, for one, it becomes an operating expense. It becomes a subscription,
Yep. Okay.
right? So it becomes a continual expense, and that has implications to who I can pick up and who when I have a problem, who I can pick up the phone and call and get immediate capability. That also has implications to updates and upgrades and security ramifications and all of the stuff that I need to take care of whenever I'm running the things myself. So
Yeah.
this idea of, again, anything as a service, but specifically visibility as a service is incredibly powerful because if you're working with the right platform provider, then what you have is you have the opportunity to plug into any number of things with a predetermined connector or a predetermined adapter. And I can plug into this cloud service. I can plug into this sales automation tool. I can plug into this social network. I can plug into this carrier or logistics carrier. I can plug into this warehouse network. I can plug into this supplier network. And I can now have they figured it out. I can now just turn it on and start to get data feeds of what I'm doing. Again, the hard part is you've got a wall of data that you're looking at. You now have to figure out what's important to you.
Mhm.
This is why when I go back and say end-to-end visibility, so that I can. It's incredibly important when you think about visibility, you're able to say, I want visibility so that I can fill in the blank, fill in whatever action, whatever outcome that you need. Visibility as a service is it has the potential to be incredibly valuable, and it's going to become very, very necessary in as we move into a more regulated world where the regulations are not just requiring us to do things differently, but we're now required to report that we're doing it differently, prove that we're doing it differently. And that again becomes visibility and being able to produce that kind of those types of things. So as you start to embark on journeys with any type of visibility, especially something that is just going to do that part of the puzzle for you, you still need to have a very, very concrete outcome so that you can configure it and know what you want to do.
I want to ask you a question from the provider standpoint. One of the things we talked about robotics as a service a little bit. I mean, one of the things robotics as a service did was it changed the dynamic for the companies that were interested in robotics but didn't have that initial upfront multi $10 million investment that they could make, right? It allowed them to invest a little bit at a time and scale as they could, kind of thing. There is advantages and disadvantages to that. I mean, obviously, it worked really well in the robotic space. I mean, I think a big disadvantage is the company offering the product doesn't have the ability to sell as much up front, right? I mean, but hopefully you're getting more down the line, so that might, maybe that makes up for that. In the robotic space, of course, it led to much more widespread adoption of robotics and automation. Do you see visibility as a service kind of doing the same thing for the visibility providers? Is it enough of a draw to expand the usage so much that you can give up a little bit of that upfront revenue that you might get by selling just the complete system today?
It depends on, so it as a provider, it depends on um how I've set up my business, right? So there's this idea, and this is what we've seen companies like Salesforce do, and Salesforce again is a great example of this, but we've done a lot of this at Clio as well, we um, where we just come in and say, we know that you're going to need this small piece. What we hope and what we've seen at Clio is that there are enough people that want that small piece that it more than pays for the whole.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you get the economies of scale. And again, and I think that's where Salesforce was incredibly brilliant. Arguably, they weren't, when they started, the best Salesforce automation, but what they did is that you didn't have to buy massive applications. You didn't have to buy massive databases. You didn't have to buy application servers, and you didn't have to do a ton of development. All you did was provision a username and password, and then let your salespeople set things up the way that they want to set things up. Um, the reason why I think it's an interesting time for, from a provider perspective, for visibility as a service is, again, from, and I hate to keep going back to it, but it's hard not to in the environment that we have. When you think about things from a geopolitical standpoint, and you think about, there is, a government change that's happening all over the world, and there are regulations that are getting tossed out, and there are new regulations that are being put in. That means that, boy, if I put in technology to support the privacy regulations from the EU, and those things change full sale, if I've made that investment, that capital investment, boy, that's tough. That's
Yeah.
just tough, right? Because what I was doing may not be enough and more investment. If I'm consuming it as a service, I'm going to say that my provider is going to make those changes. But that means that as a provider, from my perspective, I'm tracking those changes. I'm starting to tweak my technology, and I'm using the best technology there is, the most innovative technology there is. In many cases, I'm going to rely on other services to provide my services like Amazon cloud services, right? I'm going to run my things on EC2 or run my things in Azure. And I'm going to have the infrastructure as a service. I have my application for visibility, and then I'm going to provide that as a service. So as a provider, I'm doing things to control my cost. I'm doing things to ensure that I have my elasticity and that I can pass the elasticity on. But I'm
Yeah.
also making major, massive investments in the resources, namely the people that are going to be very, very closely watching all of the regulatory activity that's coming out of the EU, so that I can quickly program that in, and now I can offer it as an add-on, right? You press this
Yep.
button and you are now EU AI compliant, right? The new EU AI regulations require compliant. You can press it on and it will now start to collect the data and correlate the data, so that you can press a button and get a PDF report that you can send into their proper authorities. That's the value
Yep.
proposition that these guys are offering. And as a provider, that is where you're spending your pennies. And when you're dealing with something like compliance, you have to do it if you're going to stay in business. Well, then the
Yeah.
market just starts to make itself.
Yeah. I think there were some 140 countries or something last year that had elections.
Yes.
And I don't know how many actually changed political leanings from one or the other. I mean, I think we focus so much on the US because we're here, obviously. And certainly the Trump administration is very different from the Biden administration was, but that's taken place all over the world. There are probably 100 countries, 75 to 100 countries that probably had changes in political parties that are leading to changes like this that companies have to be aware of. So, yeah,
Absolutely. And as the world gets smaller, Brian, right? You're talking about something being a mile away, but it's 3 states away. Or I thought that something was going to be delivered and it just cleared customs in China, right?
yeah,
Um, that becomes so important because the world is getting smaller, because our supply chains are becoming so well managed that the world is getting smaller and visibility is making it smaller. And because that world is getting smaller, the impact of compliance in different countries um, absolutely becomes important, even though you may be doing business with a company that's based in the United States, because they are getting raw goods from East Asia or East Africa or wherever. Compliance and regulatory conditions exist that you have to be responsible for, and you have to prove it.
yeah. Want to end with one final question, and that's kind of tying this whole conversation back to my initial question, which was, is true end-to-end visibility really possible? I think we will get there. I think there are some companies that probably are there today, but a lot of them are not. But I want to ask you if you can kind of talk a little bit to, do you see any advances or approaches coming in the near future along the visibility landscape that will make end-to-end visibility reality for most?
Um, I think end-to-end visibility has a high level object, the thing that we're trying to achieve. I do believe that we'll get there. And, um, especially with um, the the ubiquity of remote devices and mobile access to the internet, in even the remotest places on Earth. That look, I can get stuck on a mountain and use the SOS feature on my iPhone and be able to reach the police through satellites. So it's happening. So that and Apple knows where my cell phone is, right? So that end-to-end visibility is already here. The challenge that we have with end-to-end visibility being so ubiquitous is, again, and I keep harking back, is I don't think enough of us are thinking about visibility as a mechanism to get us to some point. We're thinking about visibility as the end game. Just because I can see something, if I don't have a clear idea of how do I react to it, and how do I leverage that, then it becomes incredibly useless.
Yeah,
It's just more data, it's a man that has a newspaper subscription but doesn't read the newspaper, but just continues to stack them up in the corner. It's really not doing anything for you. So end-to-end visibility will get there. In many cases, we have gotten there. The question is what is the best way to leverage that data? Um, and sometimes with end-to-end visibility, I only want to see the data that tells me that something is wrong, because in in the best scenario of a world, things are right 99.39% of the time, right? That I can pay for that level of service. So I need to know what I'm going to do, because visibility for visibility's sake is not really useful. And so from visibility, we have to start to have that conversation on, okay, now that we have visibility, how can we take action? So now that I have full visibility into the where that head of lettuce was pulled out of the ground, and I have full visibility into that farm and that agriculture network. Now, how can I press a button and stop it because I've detected that something is wrong? I've detected that these things were mishandled.
yeah,
That becomes the next big thing. Now that I can see that the tree is fallen, what can I do about the tree falling? And that's the next step of this conversation. And that's where what we're going to really be talking about. But we can't talk about it until we can start to see these things. So I think we've taken great steps.
Yep. Thank you, Frank. We're just about out of time. Appreciate it. If people want to get in touch with Cleo to discuss this or any of your other services, is what would be the best way for them to do that?
The best way for I think someone to just kind of learn about us and kind of understand what we're doing and the value proposition that we try to meet is to go to cleo.com. Um, we've got good social media presence and reaching out to anyone that has a cleo.com address or that is tagged in LinkedIn or someplace, and any one of our 400 or 500 associates can have a conversation about what you want to have a conversation about, or can at least lead you that way. I'm Frank Kenney, Kenney, and if you do a search for me on LinkedIn and Cleo, I'm going to pop up. But more importantly, a lot of the a lot of my associates that are just well versed on so many aspects of technology and supply chain. There's just not too many problems we haven't seen. They can give you a good idea of how to solve your existing challenges around visibility or around integration or around ecosystems. So more than happy to help anyone that reaches out.
Yeah, great. Well, tell them Brian sent them and sent you, and maybe somebody will answer you.
Well,
I don't know, but
yeah, no, no.
hopefully.
Hey, it came to you from Brian, and then tag Brian, guys. You make sure you tag Brian in it so that we know.
Yeah. Again, thank you very much, Frank. I greatly appreciate the time today. Visibility is not going away; it's getting better, and I think, as you mentioned, as companies figure out how to monetize it, it's going to be great business opportunities as well. So, um,
Indeed.
we are out of time today. I want to thank my guest, Frank Kenney from Clio, for joining me, and all of you who took time out of your day to listen to us. We greatly appreciate it. New episode of Talking Supply Chain comes out each Thursday. You can find it on scmr.com or wherever you get your podcasts. So be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, this is Brian Straight, and you've been listening to Talking Supply Chain. Talking Supply Chain is produced by Supply Chain Management Review and Peerless Media. You can find it on scmr.com, supplychain247.com, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. For more information on this topic or to sign up for our weekly newsletter, a print or a digital subscription to our publication, visit scmr.com. We hope you will join us for our next episode. For Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Brian Straight, and thank you for listening.